Welcome to Cyber Protection Magazine, and today I have with me Mike Kiser from SailPoint, and SailPoint is actually busy with identity security, so probably the perfect person to talk to, since Mike is also the senior identity strategist at SailPoint. And what can companies learn from the past 1.5 years when it comes to securing identities or securing the remote
Sure.
workers?
Well, the study that we had conducted recently kind of revealed what we kind of already guessed and kind of already knew, is that I would argue that these spheres of identity are merging. Because of the pandemic, because of COVID, lifestyles and behaviors and practices were changed, and it accelerated the digitalization of life. And what I mean by that is I've sat here at this desk behind this, in front of this Napoleon chart for the last 2 years, and I'm doing everything. I'm hanging out with my religious organizations or my social institutions, or even playing poker with friends, not like in an online service, but just interacting, right? And what that means is I used to have these spheres of identity. Well, now they're blending. I have one machine, one facility for everything, because my life is being digitized. As a result, as a normal human, I have expectations of ease of use, right? And my tendencies, and the study revealed that the tendencies of people is to blur those lines on their own too. People will use their work machine to do both personal things and work things, which adds to the risk. People share passwords between their work accounts and their personal accounts. So this is not rocket science, right? But it is clear that those lines are blurring. And so what that means is we need to be able to deal with that. We need to be able to have greater insight into identities. And some of the old rules that we had don't apply. And a couple of years ago, you could say, well, if they're at work, if they're on the network, then they're safe. Otherwise, they're not. At least that was the false assumption. But now we're realizing that they're always going to be in the same place. They could be anywhere. And since identities and the things they're trying to access are distributed throughout the cloud and throughout geographic reaches, and people working from home, places we never expected before, that's distributed. And so our approach has to be identity-based and distributed as well.
That's
so
how can we do that? I mean, I would find that difficult. I mean, if I look at my situation, similar to yours, you described it. You do everything with one machine essentially. But even just looking at work, right? I mean, sometimes I am within my corporate network because I dialed in using the VPN, and sometimes I'm not, because I can do a lot of things just using the most popular cloud services. So how can we merge that together and still make sure that all these different identities are secure?
Good question. A lot of it is human-based, right? It's going to be human behavior, which makes it much more difficult, right? In the ideal situation, you don't have someone using their work-issued computer to do their personal email. Reality, they're probably going to do that. But if you can educate your users into best practices from a human side, that's going to be part of it, right? And you have to do that in a way that makes it easy for them. It channels them into best practices. If you have to educate your users and train them and make them take courses on how to do it, that's helpful, but it's not ideal. Think of like on your phone, when you pick up your phone and you have Face ID, you have strong authentication there, as long as it's done appropriately and secured on the device. What you've done is you've channeled people into using strong authentication without them even knowing. So the idea is to look for those kinds of options. So you're right, it is more difficult. Also, it means that you have to be much quicker and proactive. So that's what I was hinting at before, where we take those axes of identity and we start to apply tools like machine learning to say what's normal and what's not normal, rather than being a static decision. Now it's much more dynamic. What's normal this year? What's normal this week? And then we can start to identify some of those risky behaviors and without having to interrupt the human and make them take more training. So I think it's a both and in that respect, right? It's education, but it's also using technology on the back end, and not, I would say the most important thing is not relying on our previous expectations. We're building new models because we can, that have the data capacity and the speed to be able to take that other aspect, that identity, activity or behavior, and elevate it in importance. And so it's a new world for sure. I think digital identity, like long term, is going to come. In other words, there's legislation in various nations around having a digital identity on your phone, and that's only going to intensify this process of things being digital and the approach needing to be changed.
So the machine learning part you mentioned, it was interesting. So how can machines learn all this behavior? I mean, of course, there might be some, or I'll combine that with another question actually. If you look at cloud services, right? How can machine learning, for example, help us identify whether I'm just uploading an important Word document or an important work document, or the pictures from my last holiday, which also go to Office 365 or Microsoft. So, how can we do that?
Right. I think there are multiple layers, right? SailPoint is concerned with granting or denying access, especially to sensitive data. So if you have uploaded a set of government ID numbers or financial information, we're going to identify that or have someone else identify either way. And then we're going to make sure that enterprises know, okay, this person has access to information that might be affected by, say, GDPR, right? And so making that as little access as possible in only the right window of time that they need it is the first step. Secondarily, what you're talking about is more a general security practice of identifying what data is coming up, and then deciding how to handle that appropriately. And that's not something that SailPoint does, but it's definitely something that people are doing long term. Machine learning can actually classify and identify data. Also regular expressions. If it's text-based data, it's much easier. But if it is graphic data or videos or other things, then machine learning is beginning to be able to comprehend and understand some of these. I have a research project actually that interacts with facial recognition, for instance, that goes out and identifies, who people, there are commercial offerings that identify who people are in photographs, for instance, which has implications of privacy and other things. So that technology exists, but it's a developing field for sure. And another thing I would say is at scale, it becomes difficult, right? If you're doing this in the moment, you're going to take quite a bit of compute power to be able to identify all of that.
But the facial recognition, that's actually something interesting, because that's something I've been reading about, well, not a lot, but sometimes in the past few weeks, is the cloaking of pictures. So basically, you have a picture, and as a human, I can immediately recognize that it's you, but the machine wouldn't be able to recognize it, just because I made some very few minor adjustments. Is that a good way forward to protect my own, graphic identity, so to speak?
Okay, we're leaving the SailPoint realm here, just to clarify. At the same time, we're not, right? Because what SailPoint's doing is it's using identity. And so part of that is securing biometric information or data or whatever else, right? Because if you have a repository of faces for your employees, well, already you need to secure that. That's sensitive data that we can identify and control access to. The cloaking thing, I'm torn, because there's, as you may have read, there's a couple, actually had a talk at RSA about this. There are a couple research projects that have been let out in the past year or so that try and do that, right? That there's Fox and there's Loki. These are all open source projects that go out and try and cloak your face before you upload it. You're kind of polluting the data there. I'm not sure that long term is necessarily practical at scale. The key there too is the same as it is with securing things from an enterprise perspective. You have to make it easy to use. If they have to go outside of the direct line of what they normally, how they normally use their phone camera or whatever else, or access data, the likelihood of them doing it is not great. And so ease of use is always going to be king there. And so it's, if you want it to work, you'd have to do it both and. Enterprises would have to use some kind of technology to protect their data at rest, or their images at rest in this case. And users could have agency with it being built in somehow.
Okay.
Yeah, we could talk about that for days, but you know, that's more of an independent, on my own kind of research project.
Okay, then maybe let's go back to the ease of use of identifying yourself, because I strongly agree that this is a vital point in there. And from my own experience, as you mentioned, using Face ID or Touch ID on the phone, you know, that's really easy, and you know, it is a strong authentication. But you know, we're still in a password-dominated world, I would say. You know, we're slowly getting there, or we're getting out of there. But then you have things like the keys, the hardware keys, the FIDO2 technology. And you know, personally, I don't think that's really easy to use. Well, it is easy to use, but it's still that additional step. You know, that in fact I'm not using it that much.
Right, and I have some hardware keys as well, and my reaction is not, yay, I get to use my hardware keys, right? It's, oh, it's been 30 days or whatever the time frame is I have set up, right? Totally agree. I think what you're going to start seeing in the future is digital identification from your mobile device. Now, what that means is, you know, I think that your phone is already going to be secured, ideally by some strong authentication, right? Whether it's a biometric or something like that, something that's strong that ideally you cannot modify, but also treated in a secure way. That would give you access to the equivalent of a digital wallet in the long term, right? Where you can say, here is my identity, or issued by the government, or here is another credential that's issued by some authoritative third-party source, and I'm going to issue this, I'm going to send this to you, and you can cryptographically check that the issuer has issued this and given it to me, but it'll function just like a normal wallet. Now, the appeal there is twofold. One, it's actually more secure than my physical wallet, because I'm having to authenticate in some way. I don't just have to possess it, right? And then secondarily, it's already a concept people understand and that people kind of want. There are various movements. If you looked at Apple's recent announcement, they announced in the States that they would be doing digital identification on iPhones that you could present for airport security. And people don't think about necessarily the security implications of that. They just go, oh, that would be great. I'll just carry my phone. I won't carry a wallet anymore. And so that kind of move, you know, makes a lot of sense. And so I think it doesn't necessarily answer the additional form factor, the FIDO that is trying to be solved from that perspective, right? You still may need secondary and tertiary forms of authentication depending on the security need of what you're trying to access. But in general, I think that's going to take the place of passwords in an ideal world. You will have authenticated in, and then you'll hand off that credential.
Right. Doesn't that maybe create new security problems? Like, you know, to give you an example, which with Apple again, I personally think that Touch ID is a lot more secure than Face ID. Not because of the underlying technology, but for a simple reason. Right? If someone steals my phone, they'll have a hard time getting my thumb. But they can just hold the phone in front of my face, and then the phone is unlocked, and they have access to all of my data.
Sure. I mean, again, this is use case, right? Is one more secure than the other? Maybe, but if I'm at a party and heaven forbid you pass out and I take your phone and you've got Touch ID enabled, I just need your hand. I don't need you conscious. I don't need you showing any signs of life. Whereas Face ID, they do have liveness testing now, where it needs to be you, and you need to be awake, and you need to be vaguely normal. So the technology is advancing. I think you're right. I think fundamentally that's a technology problem. I'm happy with either, as long as it's unique and it's hard to force. And then you get into a whole privacy discussion as well, and we're going really far afield. But in terms of uh, with all of, if you're going to digitize that type of thing, you have to make it available to where you can show your ID, but not the rest of the content of the phone.
Okay.
For purposes of legal representation or whatever else.
Okay. Okay.
But it's an interesting topic for sure.
Sorry?
I said, but it's a fascinating topic.
It is. I mean, I could ask a lot more questions about that, and we're almost. However,
well, and this speaks to your original question, right? Identity security. Why is it important? Well, we've always been doing stuff via identity, right? If anyone who says no, we weren't doing zero trust or identity based stuff before, they just don't know what they've been doing technically, because it's always been identity. It's just how they've been proving that identity. We're involving, in that authentication and prove who you are phase, as well as now that we know who you are, how can we use that information efficiently and at scale so that we don't have to make you ask for everything, and that you get access right when you need it, and then we take it away. That's a dream world, but you know what I mean?
But compared to a couple of years ago, I think we're pretty far ahead. I mean, if I look personally, I have Touch ID on my Mac, I have Face ID on my phone, and what's really bothering me is every time I restart my Mac when I actually have to type in my password again. Because that's like the only time I still need it. So we're getting close. But it's probably still a way ahead, because I think there's also a difference between enterprises doing security and then in your personal private life doing security. That's
Right.
pretty different these days.
It's completely agree, because for example, I cannot get the rest of my family to use anything like a password manager. I mean, it's not that I've got a 30-second window when I sit down at someone's computer that I can install it and get it working, or else I'm kicked out, because they're not interested in security, right? They're not. Whereas in enterprise, you have an audit trail, and you have to prove that you've set the policy and you're doing what you said. And auditor, here's the proof that I've done due diligence and made at least a good faith effort and addressed any issues, right? You're right. It's a definite different factor. I find the interlocking of those really fascinating, where people don't really care about the personal security until an enterprise abuses their personal security and identity. It's a fascinating social bleed over, maybe.
And maybe just a final question, because I like to ask that question every once in a while. So where do you see, specific to identity, of course, where do you see us in 5 years?
Like I said, in 5 years, I think the digitalization process will have advanced more. I think that you will use your phone as a digital wallet in addition to being a digital pocket. Pockets contain everything, so do phones. And I think wallets are the last kind of phase into that. And then I think that you won't have to ask for things in terms of accessing things in an enterprise or interacting with a vendor or anything else. I think they'll know who you are, and you can prove it via that mobile device centric relationship. I think it's going to be the future in 5-10 years. More and more, it's going to be all about the relationship rather than the mechanism. What I mean by that is, if I'm holding around if I have a wallet right now, right, I have a relationship with all those entities that gave me those cards or those proofs of who I am. And right now, the holders of the wallets in general are enterprises. And I think we're going to devolve a little bit to it being more user, human or bot centric. If that makes sense. It's going to be a fascinating change. The enterprise will still be doing what it needs to do. In other words, it will still have its own repository and be making those decisions and learning and evolving its model and having a coherent security approach based on identity, because there's no other way. But the relationship is going to shift a little bit.
Yeah, I think I agree. And if I see, my kids always tell me, usually it's the other way around, but in that case it's me, why are you looking at your smartphone again? But then, you will have to explain them that, it's not just a phone anymore these days. It's everything. It's already a little bit of my wallet. It's my smart home control. It's everything. So
yeah, that's my new. Yeah, that's my new phrase. Like the phones are pockets, is what they are. And so I was like, oh, of course they are, because they're doing everything. And in like 1998. We were like, oh, if only we had that. Well, now we kind of do. So,
yeah, a lot has changed, and we'll see what the development will bring us.